Hello everybody, it is 10 p.m. Central Time on July 9th, 2016. Welcome into the Earthquake 3D live stream. For those of you who are in the chat room, it looks like there's about 200 people joining in right now. In case you're new, this is the live stream which covers earthquakes which struck over the past 48 hours, and every day at 10 p.m. I get on and do a quick update to let people know what happened throughout the day. And if you haven't heard, here in the middle west of the United States in Oklahoma, going into South Kansas, starting last night, a series of 4.0 earthquakes began to strike in the Midwest and struck 4.2, 4.4, 4.2, and a swarm of 3s and other 2.0 earthquakes. And just to get us going right off the bat, before we even go look at the West Coast, I want to show you the largest of the bunch and open it up here on the screen for you to see where the earthquake struck. Show you the earthquake epicenter, and we will explain why this struck, why another series of 4.0 earthquakes struck since last night. And if you were paying attention last night, we were talking about how the earthquake threat was growing in the region, specifically around Oklahoma, and that the superfracture in the area would draw out in size and grow larger and cause other additional sized earthquakes. So I'm opening up on the screen here for you now, just a screen capture of everything I'm looking at on my screen. You're going to see the view count disappear temporarily. And we'll zoom in on the area. I've got many viewers in the area, Oklahoma, Kansas, Arkansas. People in the Midwest signed up for earthquake updates specifically because of the fracking earthquake issue. And this is a fracking earthquake issue. It's a 4.4 that struck right next to several frack wells. And it's part of a swarm of earthquakes that struck at this fracking operation over the past 24 hours. It all began with the 4.2 about 1,500 feet away, and that started off the swarm. Then we saw another 4.2 strike about 1,500 feet west. Then the 4.4 struck over here in the middle of the operation. And every single one of these little pads, I showed it in last night's update, I'll show it again today, is a different oil or gas pumping operation. And now there's a reason that this is striking at the pumping operation as opposed to east in the New Madrid or to the northwest up in Yellowstone. And to show that to you, let me turn down the earthquakes for the last 2-3 days. Just make sure that's for the last 3 days. There we go. And you'll be able to see the 4.0 activity that struck off the coast to the Pacific Northwest. In between that time, a 4.3 and 4.5 struck at the California-Nevada border. And this brings us up to last night's update, and then the earthquake struck right before I did my update last night. So, since that all occurred, what happened across the East Coast, what happened in the Midwest, and on the West Coast? Many of my viewers living in California, many other viewers watching on the East Coast for new movement. The East Coast movement has not occurred yet. Hasn't been a full 24 hours since we said to watch. I'm leaning into that full 24-hour period, but it should strike in the next few hours going into tomorrow up the East Coast with that 3.0 activity that we're expecting. And that's not that big, so we're not really that concerned with a 3.0 earthquake on the East Coast. Maybe one viewer in particular might be concerned about that, and that was a guy who said earthquakes don't happen on the East Coast, but that's wrong. Now on the West Coast, however, we can see the larger earthquakes, and again this is just showing us 2.0 and greater through the combined USGS and EMSC feed. But even with that feed, you can see a 3.3 struck in Northwest California. And this ties in with what I told you to watch for last night. Now the earthquake on the East Coast hasn't hit yet, but it looks like the reset button is starting to be hit on the West Coast, and we're seeing earthquakes progress back up to the Northwest, leading towards activity off the coast again in the next few days. But first things first, I'm really watching for the East Coast to get hit. That usually resets us to the West Coast. So it could fall before or slightly after, but I'm leaning more after the East Coast movement. But where did it strike? Where did the 3.3 strike? Well, yesterday's update fully covered all the volcanoes and even the nuclear detonation operations that where there's different hundreds of craters in the ground where they did different nuclear detonations, and there's earthquakes striking at that spot. But the 3.3 struck in Green Valley, which is very close to Napa, just a few miles away from Napa. And you may remember the near 7.0 earthquake that struck at Napa about 4 years ago, 3.5 years ago. I want to say it was a mid-6 that struck up there, and it didn't cause much damage. But this is just north of San Francisco, northeast of San Francisco by a few miles. And anytime we start to see 3.0 activity going along the fault zones in San Francisco, we have to pay attention. Why? Because sometimes it leads to larger earthquakes. It's fault zone movement in an area that's prone for larger movement to strike. We have all the magma chambers being struck over to the east, and to show that to you, you may hear some dings and rumbles as I'm talking. That's new earthquake striking. But to show you all the smaller activity and the activity that struck to the east, we have to look at 0.0 and greater on the west coast. I'll turn down the ring so we can get a better idea where the earthquake struck since last night's update, and then you'll be able to make out two different things have occurred. Since last night's update, the earthquake's backfilled all the way to the northwest, causing a new earthquake up in the northwest tip of Nevada at Bittner Butte. Additionally, progression down the border region of Nevada and California, causing additional 1.0 and 0.0 swarms, so very small swarms. But all of these locations we showed last night, well, they were again struck today. To top it all off, Los Angeles was struck by a 2.4 earthquake right in North LA, very close to Aliso Canyon. And Aliso Canyon is the spot where the gas leak occurred, and it's also the spot just west in Ventura where the pipeline just broke a couple days ago, last week, less than a week ago, but more than a few days ago. So what does that all mean? Well, the pumping operations have been hit with the 2.4 that you see on the screen. The dormant volcanoes continue to be hit over to the east. The swarm carries on, although it's much smaller today, at the spot where the 4.3 and 4.5 struck, proving that the pressure has now transferred to the east-southeast, and you can already see it. The new swarm of earthquakes down near the nuke spots. Further to the south, Salton Sea carries on. So Salton Sea is an ongoing event. It's 15, 16 kilometers below the surface, the magma chamber, and it's rising. Now, how long will it take for it to continue rising to the point where we either see a eruption or till it stops? I don't know. I don't think anybody could be able to put a time limit on that, but the fact that it's carrying on even right now is proof that something's going on in the magma chamber down below, and it's causing that lateral fault zone movement. And you can see the fault zone movement spreading out from the cluster, because the cluster is taking the shape of Salton Sea itself, the magma chamber down below. Now you can see the fault zone going up to the northwest towards California, or I'm sorry, towards Los Angeles, where the 2.4 struck down here in South California. Then we have progression down to the south of the border of California going into Mexico, into Baja. And the 2.3 striking down here, I'm going to get the coordinates, put them up on Google Earth, and show you guys what's there. It's important to show you. We don't have to show you all the earthquake epicenters tonight. We'll just show you a few. The rest stand for what they are. We already looked them up many times over the past couple days. You'd almost have to tune in for the past several nights to get a better idea of what we're talking about here. We don't have time. I spent 40 minutes last night going over all the different volcanoes that were struck up the west coast. But this is falling just a few miles away from Cerro Prieto volcano, and this is another volcano, Butte, just like Salton Sea. And the Mexicans, they have their own small salt sea here that they are using for evaporation purposes, and they extract different chemicals, different salt, and different, I guess, maybe even some elements out of there, maybe even a little bit of gold mining going on out of there. But regardless, you can see it's just south of Salton Sea by a few miles, and they're two buttes. They're the same, only separated by mileage. And we have earthquakes striking there. Okay, so why are the earthquakes striking there? Well, for the same reason the pumping operations are getting hit. Upwelling pressure coming from down below and pushing from the west-northwest. Now there's silence off the coast. There's been silence off the coast for the last 2 days, or 3 days, since the 4.3 struck. Now it's pushing to the east. We expect the earthquake on the east coast, but in addition to that, we have to watch for a new round of mid-4 to possible 5 to strike again off the coast. I know this sounds crazy, but when we look at the rest of the activity internationally, when we look at what's going on with new deep earthquakes happening in the West Pacific over the past day, 2 days, this means we're going to see a new round of Pacific activity spilling over into the East Pacific from the West Pacific. And this is something new in addition to what we were talking about last night. When we look at the last 48 hours of earthquake activity here, you'll be able to see an increase in 4.0 activity to the north. So basically from North Philippines or Central Philippines north to Alaska, it's obvious. So the progression of 4s is up to the north this time, and to the south we only have a few. Well, this follows those deep earthquakes that we talked about underneath Japan and underneath Indonesia. So the pressure is spreading upwards and outwards from those deep earthquakes that were a few days ago. I'll turn those on so you can see them. Raised slightly high off the globe. Now you don't see the deep Japan quake. That was reported only by the Europeans. But regardless, there was a deep earthquake below Japan, and that's caused movement to the north. Well, this will carry on over to the United States and to North America, and it'll most likely strike the silent zone in between the two spots that have moved. And this puts us back down into northwest Oregon, southwest Washington, right here off the coast. So if you're on the west coast, you need to watch for two different things. 1, earthquake off the northwest. 2, lateral movement down the coast after that. So this takes us out a couple days now. In addition to the East Coast, of course, on the East Coast, we're talking about the eastern edge of the craton and only looking for 3.0 activity. Why are we looking for 3.0 activity? Because 4.0 activity struck to the west. We always see the earthquakes progress from the west coast to the east coast and progress right up the east coast out to the Atlantic Ocean, where Quebec, southeast Quebec meets New Brunswick, even North Maine, right in that region, going into the northeast beyond New England. And so 4.0 struck off the coast. Then they struck interior to the coast, which you see on the map here now. Let me turn up just for the larger earthquakes. Then pressed to the east, where it caused 3 different 4.0 earthquakes or greater, and then the activity will press up the east coast over the next day. Down to the south in Central America, you can see over the past day, day and a half, there's only been 1 noteworthy earthquake, and that struck right in the middle of the warned zone. You may remember last night we talked about this, the middle of the silent zone being the spot to watch for movement. Well, it's off the coast of El Salvador and Nicaragua, right where Nicaragua, El Salvador, and Honduras meet. And that was the exact location warned for new movement. We told you to watch for only mid-4 to 5.0 activity to strike. And that was based upon the other movement nearby on either side, and let's go ahead and show that to you. Okay, either side, you can see 4.6, 5.0 down to the south, 4.7 to the north, and in between a mid-4. That just struck. We talked about that last night, and it's not that big. Again, we're not looking for that large of movement right now. Now, to the south, we're looking for much larger. We're looking for 6.0-ish earthquake activity to strike in the middle of the silent zone. Well, the silent zone was the coast of Peru, and you see it on the screen, 4.4 struck there now. We're looking for at least 2 magnitudes larger to strike in this region over the next day, 2 days at the most. So keep watch in South America for a larger earthquake to strike, and it's going to strike most likely along the coast right next to where this 4.4 struck. Why do I say that? Because of the previous activity that struck over the past several days. Okay, so when we take a look at the activity in South America, there's only 1 area to watch. Central America, there's only 1 area to watch. North America, there's 2 areas to watch. In the West Pacific, let's just quickly run down the earthquakes that struck over here. Again, we already talked about it, the activity to the north, meaning we're going to see compensation to the south and to the west. One more thing I'd like to point out, people may remember last night, we talked about how this is the pinnacle of the spot that hasn't moved. Let's go ahead and show that to you again. This is the last 7 days of earthquakes in the West Pacific, 4.0 and greater. The deep earthquakes are raised high off the globe, and the larger the earthquake, the larger the ring. So we have a bunch of 5s mixed in with a bunch of 4s. Well, there's a noticeable silent area just here to the west. That's Sumatra, Indonesia, where the 4.9 is. Well, last night, there was nothing there. And we told people to watch in this spot for new movement. Now, the movement we're watching for is 6.0 or greater or much greater. It could go another magnitude higher than that. And I base that upon all the movement to the east, all the movement to the northwest, and no activity there in particular. It's been completely silent over the last 7 days. We haven't seen any activity there, even rare activity down in Australia, spreading down all around Antarctica, but no activity in Sumatra, Indonesia, where you would expect to see some kind of movement over a week. So one single 4.9 is not going to release the pressure that we're talking about here, and it should go up to a magnitude and a half larger, taking us into that 6 range, possibly even larger than that. But I don't want to get too above where it could go. Don't want to panic people too hard on that. But it's a lot of movement to the east, a lot of movement to the northwest, and an obvious silent zone right down in between the 2 points that needs to be connected. And since it's been silent, it's building pressure. Okay? Over in Europe, let's get into Europe really quick. I don't have many European viewers or South American viewers, but you guys do need to be aware of what's going on. Let's turn on the EMSC combined European feed. Then you'll be able to make out that Italy was struck, South France, North Spain was struck, Canaries were struck again, and then I'll have to turn on the USGS feed again to show you the other earthquake struck up at the North Pole and south of Iceland, 2 different 4s. Now those 4s strike into the north, which you don't see on the screen here now. Let's show those to you really quick. If it'll populate. There we go. That's the Gackle Ridge. That's about 700 miles north of Mount Dutch supervolcano, and Mount Dutch supervolcano is literally at the north tip of the Mid-Atlantic Ridge. So that activity that struck there, though, we were talking about the Gackle Ridge. We told you guys to watch the Gackle Ridge multiple days in a row. The reason being, pressure transfers from Europe, across Europe, and up to the north. There was one single 4.5 south of Iceland, as I told you. The new 4.5 striking up the ridge after the pressure transfers up through Europe. And to see the European earthquakes, let's turn that back on. Again, all the 3s to the south, a deep 3 earlier this week over in Serbia or in Romania, east of Serbia. And then a shallow series of earthquakes spreading to the west-northwest, right across the Canaries. And we expect that. So where do we watch in Europe over the next few days? Well, you can see a silent zone in North Italy, and I named this out last night and told you guys to watch for the next 2 to 3 days. We're still watching. It's moved all around to the south, to the west, to the north, and down below, deep below, with that deeper 3.3. This means Italy, Austria, Switzerland even, but Switzerland with CERN and all the smaller earthquakes there, we'll throw them out for now and just look at North Italy going into Austria as a possible earthquake location for a larger earthquake to strike above the magnitudes that we see here. We're looking at least 1 magnitude larger because there's been a series of 4s that struck. You don't see them on the map, but they have struck down to the south over the past several days. We talked about them last night. So, next several days, South Europe, 4 could strike up in North Italy, and we know that can cause damage with some of the structures that are there. Overall, it's not large activity that we're looking for. We're not looking for megaquakes or anything like that, and we aren't looking at any new eruptions yet, unless we start seeing solar wind activity pick up in a greater amount than what currently came through. I think a lot of people made a big deal about the coronal hole canyon that was facing us, and there was not that big of a deal to be made. So everybody was looking for this massive solar storm to be coming in, and we may have gotten a little bit of solar wind, but it didn't appear to cause any major earthquakes. I mean, when the largest earthquake of the bunch is in the Midwest, we're talking about a swarm of 4s at the fracking operation that came off the activity from many days ago. So is it related to the solar activity? No. We were already looking for 4s to strike before there was ever even a coronal canyon facing Earth. So there it goes. Hope this update really helps. How many people are in the chat room? Let's go take a quick look. Before everybody blazes out of here, let's just go take a quick look. And for those of you who are new here, I do this every night at 10 p.m. just to recap what happens over the day and to compare to the areas that I tell you to watch from the day before or from the forecast. Now this coming week, I'll have a new forecast out on my channel, a video forecast that we can go by. I was trying to do it on the live stream. That doesn't seem to be doing the best job for getting the word out on the forecast, but it certainly works for doing the confirmations on the forecast. So as we sit here throughout the week and we confirm whether or not the areas I'm naming are being hit, that's the spot where the live stream's coming in handy. There's a whole bunch of people in chat. I want to thank all the people that have been part of this. Everybody